So hello again, everybody, and welcome to another of our lockdown webcasts that we have been bringing you at Travel Weekly as we're all working from home, trying to keep you connected and informed with everything that's going on through these very, very difficult times. I'm delighted today to be joined by three experts in PR and communications because we wanted to talk today a little bit about trust and reputation for the travel industry. Currently in the midst of this crisis, but also going forward. So I'm joined by Rachel O'Reilly, who is Director of Communications at Kuoni. I'm joined by Danny Rogers, who is Editor-in-Chief of PR Week. And I'm joined by Paul Charles, who is the Founder and Chief Executive of PC Agency. So welcome, everybody. Thank you very much for joining us. Paul, I'm going to start with you, actually, because right when this began, I was in the office still, so I'm talking maybe 5 weeks ago, and your face was on Sky News a lot. So you were brought in right at the start to talk about the situation. At the time, I think it was sort of coronavirus was confined to the Far East, to China, and you were talking a little bit about that. Give us, I mean, I know you've been back on TV a number of times. You've been giving just give us an idea of how it unfolded for you.
It feels like another era, doesn't it, Lucy, really? Yet it's only a few weeks. I mean, we've only been in lockdown pretty well for 25 days. Yet it almost feels like 25 months, I think, by the time we've got to this today. Yeah, I think it all started earlier in the year with something that we all felt was a very regional crisis, that it was related very much to China, obviously. Maybe other parts of Asia were dragged in slowly. But it felt a long way from venturing into Europe and definitely into the UK. And it reminded me very much of SARS back in 2003, 2004. I was working at Eurostar then, and we all felt SARS was very much a regional issue. It was very related to Asia, and then it started to spread into Europe. And I remember it affected our operations then. So luckily, from my perspective, that advance warning I had this year came very much from my experience at Eurostar back in the early 2000s. And I feel very much the same today, and I'm sure we'll talk about it later, that I feel like it's developing in exactly the same way SARS did back in 2004. But it's very strange that just a few weeks ago, we felt like Britain wouldn't be affected. Europe was a long way from the crisis. And of course, that's proven not to be the case.
Yeah, well, in fact, you're absolutely right, because around that time, the industry put out a campaign. It was led by Advantage at the time, but lots of people got on board with that sort of PR campaign, which was keep calm and travel on. I don't know, bringing you in, Rachel, whether you supported that, but I think at the time, that was a message to say, relax, it's not here. You can, okay, you might not want to travel to China, but there's still plenty of places you can travel. Well, you know, very rapidly, places were just taken off limits. So what was your experience at that stage, Rachel? Because you obviously operate to the whole world. As a PR expert, you must have been trying to move people to different destinations and promote those still, but then eventually you couldn't promote anywhere. Oh, Rachel's frozen. Maybe my question was just too much for her. Let's hope we'll get Rachel back in a second. I don't know what's happened there. Danny, let's bring you in, because obviously you're outside of travel per se. You're covering PR across many different sectors. A broad question, I guess, but what's been your view of the way the travel industry has handled this situation? I mean, right from the start in terms of cancellations and repatriations and getting people home up until now and the situation we're in at the moment.
Well, I think until yesterday, I was very sympathetic towards the travel industry. I think that, you know, it's one of those crises that affects every single sector. And it seemed to me that every travel company had been hit, and therefore consumers were somewhat sympathetic to the plight of travel companies. But it seems to me that the last 24, 48 hours, things have taken a turn for the worse. That Which report that was published today, showing that many big operators are not giving refunds. Indeed, a lot of operators don't even seem to be answering the phone or responding to consumers who rightly are asking for their money back because they haven't taken the holiday, they may be out of work, they may need that money. And I think there is a certain amount of sympathy that it's very difficult for travel operators, but I sense a growing frustration with the public and with the media for a lot of operators and airlines who seem to be just stonewalling consumers at the moment. So I do have a lot of sympathy for travel. I think travel has been hit more than almost any other sector. Travel and hospitality have been hit by almost any other sector. But, you know, travel needs to be doing its best to act in the right way, in the long-term interest of the consumers, or it could have a serious long-term reputational problem on its hands.
Yeah, well, you mentioned that Which report. And actually, if you read into that report they put out this morning, they did actually go on to say that the industry is forced into this situation, or the tour operators, because we haven't had any guidance through from the government as other countries have. And so it is kind of being forced into this position. But of course, that's not the headline that the national media pick up. They just came out, I saw this morning on BBC Breakfast, it just said, travel companies are breaking the law by not giving refunds. And they didn't go into the detail of why they are forced into this situation, because, you know, the money is in this huge pipeline and people just haven't got it to give back. And I think that's the message. I mean, Paul, you're nodding. Rachel, I'll bring you back in a minute. We lost you for a second. Don't worry. I asked you a question and you were just completely still, and I hadn't realised that we'd lost you. So we'll come back in. But just because you were nodding, Paul, there, I mean, this is the problem, isn't it? There are some really complex issues at heart for the industry. But if you're a consumer who just now is in a financial pickle and you need some money back, you're not going to listen to all of that, are you?
No, you're not. I mean, there's two sides, obviously, to this story. First of all, the tour operators in particular are desperate for money. There's no doubt about it. They need to conserve their cash for as long as possible, as indeed do airlines, hotels, and everyone wrapped up in the travel sector. So that's why they're trying to convince consumers to take vouchers or to rebook, ideally, so that they've got something to look forward to, but most importantly, the operators themselves, or the airlines or the hotels, actually have some bookings going forward and they can hang on to the cash. Obviously, from a consumer perspective, the difficulty is that you've got a lot of people now being furloughed, so they're nervous about whether they're going to get their jobs back. And secondly, you've got consumers who just have no visibility because of this crisis. Barely any of us have any visibility on what's going to happen, you know, past the next 2 or 3 months. So because of that, consumers are desperate to get as much cash back as they can that they've previously paid out. And they want to be able to trust operators and airlines and hotels, cruise lines, everybody in the sector. They want to trust them that they'll get their money back. So they're trying to get it back now because they're not sure about the trust. They're not sure they'll be around in a few months' time to be able to pay them back, and especially if they're not under a bonded scheme of some kind.
Yeah, and of course sorry, Danny, please come in. Yeah,
I just wanted to add that what's interesting is, and I totally agree with Paul, but some of those large companies are now under enormous scrutiny that probably they weren't before. And you've got companies like Virgin Atlantic, for example, who are possibly quite justifiably calling for a government loan. But the trouble is that then consumers and the media start looking at the amount of tax that Richard Branson has paid in the last 10, 20 years, or they start looking at the profitability of IAG, the parent company of BA, which has made £10 billion worth of profits in the last year. And they think, well, hang on a sec, you know, I understand your plight, but you seem to be very profitable and not entirely benevolent in the good times. So it's that increased scrutiny that puts people under pressure, I think.
Okay, let's bring Rachel in, because Rachel Kuoni has been hailed as one of the good guys by Which. Oh, keep nearly losing you. So I was just saying that Kuoni has been named as one of the good guys by Which, but I mean, to go to Paul's point, I mean, even you must be trying to make as many rebookings as possible. I think the point is that you are offering a refund where that is really the only option for the customer, but presumably you are still your first option is to try and keep hold of the booking.
Yeah, absolutely. But Paul mentioned a point which is really important, and that's all about trust. I mean, we're a brand that's been around in the UK market for over 50 years. And often when people come to us, they're coming to us with the most important holiday of their lives. About a quarter of our business is honeymoons. Alongside that, you know, people who are retiring, you know, splashing out on a really big tour. So, you know, often they've spent a good couple of hours talking to one of our sales team about this trip. You know, and these are big amounts of money, large amounts of money that people are paying out for very special trips. So that trust piece is really important. And I mean, for us, you know, there's no textbook, there's no rule book, you know, to follow with this kind of crisis. It's a first for all of us, but we did feel that trust from the outset was going to be absolutely critical. And our reputation and keeping that intact was important, because we're a brand that's been around for 50 years, but we want to be around for the next 50, 100 years or whatever. But we are refunding, but I think that skill comes in the people that we've got working for us. You know, we've got people that know destinations inside out and back to front. You know, we like to think we've recruited really well. So when it comes to having personal conversations with people to say, look, your holiday isn't going to go ahead, the skill then comes in persuading them to stay with us, and that is a skill. And I'm pleased to say that, you know, some of our team have about an 80% retention rate in keeping customers and moving their dates into next year, which is an absolutely brilliant, you know, result. So we're having great success with keeping people. People still want a holiday to look forward to.
Oh dear, we're having a problem with Rachel's connection, I think, today. Paul, I'll just come back to you and talk about airlines, because yesterday we were talking to a travel agent who was furious that the ABTA or various bodies weren't putting more pressure on the airlines. But of course, we all know this money goes in a pipeline. It's in a chain. You know, the agent collects the money, pays it onto the tour operator. Both of those parties will keep an element of commission, and then it'll go on predominantly to an airline or a cruise line, whatever, and they'll take that money. And where those flights have not yet been taken, those sectors haven't been flown, why are the airlines not then repaying that money back to the tour operator? And I ask you that because I know, and I'm sorry to pick on you because you're not working in an airline anymore, but you have worked at a couple of airlines. So why do you think, because that is one of the problems, isn't it? Because they're not bringing the money back down the line.
Absolutely, and I think you raise a point here that is at the nub of the financial problem of the industry at the moment. There are several tour operators, without doubt, and agents who are in such deep financial distress because they're not getting paid back by their suppliers quickly enough. So the airlines are hanging on to money as long as possible before giving it back to operators and agents. Now, it goes back to trust, it goes back to the long-term relationship. And I dare I say it, I think there are owners out there and CEOs, sadly, of smaller companies who are perhaps not, of larger companies who are not realizing this is going to be about long-term relationships, that we're all in it together. They need to be paying back this money fast in order to protect the whole chain of the industry. And if you don't pay it back, you'll find that some of your key agents go under, which can't be right at all. So they should be paying back. And I guess one of the issues as well is that it's not necessarily deliberate. It's because they've furloughed so many people, or the customer services teams are so busy because they've been inundated with inquiries, they simply haven't got the admin in place to pay it back quickly. And I'd like to think that's more of the issue. It's because, you know, we can't get through to call centres, we can't get through online, simply because nobody can cope with the huge demand on their systems at the moment.
So what's the answer then? I mean, Rachel's clearly being held as, or Kuoni is being held as a good example. Is that because you have got deeper pockets, because you have got a parent company in Germany that is able to invest a bit more money, allow you to not furlough so many staff so you can keep up that level of service? Because, that's clearly, you're managing to provide a good service and keep people on side and etc. But I guess that's just not an option for some companies, the way they've been run and the way they're financed and the way they're structured.
Yeah, I mean, the balance between furlough and core staff is a very difficult one to make. We had to take a judgment call very early on about how, obviously, making the most of the opportunity of the furlough scheme, which is, a fantastic offer that's been made by the government to allow us to keep our staff. So that's important, and we needed to maximise that, absolutely. But equally, based on trust, and we're a customer service brand, we have to have enough people. We took 50 people to run our virtual call centre, and that was set up within 2 days. So that means tech, getting people set up with laptops. We weren't a home working business, we had stores, but we moved very quickly. So we've got about 50 people in the virtual call centre. We've used our website to communicate very clearly, and we're talking about PR and communications here. I don't normally write content for the website, but actually I was brought in to make our website much more user-friendly for customers. So, when people are flailing around, sort of thinking, my goodness, what about my honeymoon? We could use our website to be able to communicate very, very clearly to them. And I suppose that's where the skills of a good comms person comes in, to be able to point people, answer as many questions as people could via the website before they phoned us. Because the trouble is, as Paul said, the phone lines in the early days was extremely busy, so people get frustrated. But we also said, look, be patient as well, because, we will get to you. We are calling you to speak to you one-to-one. So, yeah, I think use your website, use your channel. I took over the social media channels as well. So we used our social channels in a proactive way to help customers and put a human face behind their brand as well.
Okay, sounds very good. Danny, you said right at the start that, you've seen a change in the tide in the last couple of days, and if people aren't careful, there could be long-term damage. So with that in mind, what should the industry do now? And is it dependent on a decision by the government, which we've been waiting for 5 weeks for, so we've no guarantee that's going to happen. And certainly the indications we're getting is that we may get some sort of guidance on the refund credit notes being underwritten, but not the full change the package travel directive that people are asking for. So it may not be the wholesale solution that the industry is looking for. So should we wait for that, or what should the industry do to try and make sure that this isn't an unmitigated, disaster PR-wise for the sector?
Well, I think, listening to Rachel, I think that what this crisis is going to do is it's going to enhance the brands that have been doing the right thing previously. I think companies that have got a good culture, that are well set up in terms of customer service, that tend to have a sort of ethical compass, if you like, I think they will come out of it okay. But I think if companies have been cutting costs on customer service, or they've been trying to hoard cash, or whatever other sort of unethical practices, I think they're the ones that will suffer. So I don't think there's a blanket thing that every travel company can do to come through this. I think companies will inevitably find their own way through. I'm sure that's what Rachel and Paul, your clients, are finding. They're finding their own way through this. But I think it's about doing the right thing. Ethical behaviour, or corporate purpose, as it's been called in recent years, will only become more and more important over the next 6 months.
Okay. Paul, I just wanted to ask you, because I think Rachel, somebody said that this is an unprecedented situation. Nobody could have prepared for this, or maybe it was yourself, you said it. Should people do more in the way of crisis management PR? I mean, PR can be all about promotion and it's all great when it's lovely, but there's that sort of crisis management aspect to it as well. And do enough travel companies take that seriously? Do they have enough? And if they had done it, would this have ever been enough anyway for something of this magnitude?
Well, I must say we're busier than ever on the crisis side of the PC agency. We are advising a lot of our clients on not just recovery plans for the future, but also how they do come across in the current environment. As both Rachel and Danny have said, is very much around trust and judgment, and that's what consumers are basing their decisions on at the moment. Is it good judgment by a brand? And yes, it's unprecedented, but it's also unpredictable. And I think this is where you need good advice, be it from an agent or a tour operator you might be using, be it on the PR side from an agency or a consultant. You need good advice on how to navigate at the moment, because all of us are in this together. We're all finding it's a situation which is highly unpredictable and difficult to know when we're going to get visibility. And as a result of that, you need some really good advice out there. And undoubtedly, CEOs and C-group leaders are sometimes not getting the best advice internally because they've got their own teams around them. And sometimes you need to hear from the outside world what's really going on and how best to tackle a particular thing. So the airlines and the groups that we're advising, we are absolutely telling them as transparently and honestly as possible where we think things are going to head in the next few months. And it's not always good news, far from it. There's a lot of bad news about the next few months. And I think the industry as a whole doesn't quite realise yet that actually this is going to be much tougher than everybody might think at the moment. There's no bounce back coming over the summer. You just got to understand and plan for no bounce back at the moment. I honestly don't think the industry is going to be in any decent state before this time next year. So if you think about the impact of that on cash flow, how businesses are operating, they're going to have to take some really tough decisions at the moment to get themselves through to this time next year.
And you've got lots of different clients, Paul, like from airlines to destinations, tour operators, hotels, you've got the whole range. And is the advice you give very similar, or is it very different depending on the type of business?
It's different depending on the sector. So as I say, I think the hotel sector is worst hit at the moment. Hotels, don't know when they're going to reopen. They don't have much cash generally anyway, so it's a very hard time for them. Tourism boards are in a better place. Tourism boards are often government funded. Their budgets are set much earlier in the year or in advance. And they're destinations which are much bigger than companies. So they're not going to go away. Destinations are always going to be attractive over the medium to longer term. So destinations tend to be in a better place. The airlines, of course, are having the worst time ever. The industry is going to lose something like $300 billion over the next 12 months, and it's going to take 3 years to recover. So only airlines with huge pockets and huge amounts of cash are going to get through this in any decent shape, but they're still going to have to retire maybe 30-40% of their aircraft and sadly see some redundancies among their cabin crew. Yeah. So it depends which sector you're looking at. Some are better than others, if anyone can be better in this situation.
Yeah, well, of course, we saw Mauritius go today, which is very sad. Danny, I want to ask...
Airways, obviously, Virgin, we've talked about in Australia. These are huge brands. These are brands that have often transformed a destination or transformed how we fly. And it's really sad to see some of them disappear or face such trouble, because it means we as consumers won't have as much choice. Prices could ultimately go up for those left behind. And we certainly won't get as good a product in the future.
Yeah. Well, on that point, I know lots of people are now, it's difficult to know when to start that sort of positive PR again. It's interesting you mentioned destinations, because we're getting so many press releases through about how to make a cocktail from a particular area, or virtual tours of museums or whatever it might be. So the destinations appear to be quite active still in that sort of soft touch. It's not a sales message, but it's just a reminder about the destination. So do you think that's a good thing to be doing? And at what point will you as PR experts be moving that to the next phase in terms of saying, okay, now we might start subtly pushing a little bit more?
Well, I actually think virtual travel, which you talk about, and armchair travel is dying out. I think we're all a bit sort of over that. We all want to move on in the same way the lockdowns we're all getting frustrated by now. We want to move on. I think support for lockdowns is fast fading. I think that what I'm advising, destinations and tourism boards generally, is obviously to think through what the second half of the year looks like, what the 6 months later on is going to look like in terms of rebuilding. We will be booking again. We'll probably be booking later this year and early next year, ready for next summer. So we need to be telling tourism boards exactly how to market themselves ready for next summer, and how they're going to be different and how they're going to change, how they won't be suffering from over-tourism. Under-tourism will be a key thing that they'll need to talk about, and how they're more sustainable, how they're changing as a destination. There's lots of bright things and positive things for them to talk about. The challenge is when you talk about them. The consumer's not quite ready to hear those things yet. It's some way.
Interesting you mentioned there about under-tourism and sustainability. Of course, Rachel, that was, by the way, this is Rachel's twin who's joined us.
Well, I just say this is crisis management in action, because this is like the worst internet connection I've ever had.
Well, don't worry, because it will make it exciting, and we'll make people
disappearing Rachel. I've got to say something before I disappear again. I did talk about sustainability. I wrote a column for you. Thank you, Lucy, for publishing that. But I mean, that was probably probably on lots of people's minds, because I got lots of feedback from that, saying that people have been grappling the same thing. That the point being that albeit this is a terrible situation, we are seeing some positive signs, and there are some big issues that the industry's been grappling with, which is carbon, which is over tourism. All sorts of topics around sustainability, which have been, gaining momentum in the travel industry of late. And I think when the travel industry comes through this, and it will come through it, these are all things that I think need to be firmly on the radar. Paul looks after lots of destinations, and those are lots of destinations that we send our customers to. And I think I pointed out in the column about New Zealand, that have already come out to say, they're going to completely relook at their tourism plans, and they want an industry that gives back to the local economy, and maybe there's a way to travel better.
Yeah, is that a good message, Danny? Do you think that would be welcomed by consumers?
It's a really interesting one, isn't it? I think Rachel's right. I think we had a looming crisis in tourism and travel anyway. I think it was becoming increasingly unsustainable and unacceptable, possibly the level of irresponsible travel that was going on in the world. Whether or not this will reset the balance, I don't know. I mean, I think consumers would be very, very keen to get their holidays going again. They'll be very, very keen to travel again. And companies will be very, very keen to get their capacity up, as Paul rightly says. They'll want their planes back in the air. They'll want their staff back working. Whether or not that can be done while still improving the overall sustainability of the industry, it's going to be tough. It may be that green issues fall down the agenda for a while as we try and recover. I hope not, but it's a distinct possibility.
Interesting, two opposing views there. I mean, one of the things about getting these planes full again, how big a PR challenge is it going to be for airlines or cruise lines or theme parks, or cities where lots of people are in close proximity? How big a PR challenge is it going to be to get that health and safety message across? Because it's not, you've got to convince people that it is safe to get and sit really close proximity to somebody, or be dining next to somebody in a restaurant.
EasyJet came out this week, didn't they, talking about not using the middle aisle. And they seem to be quite early with that, and there was lots of sort of conversation around that sort of move they've made to reassure people, I guess, that they were taking action to try and distance people, even before people can fly. So I think that it will be, because let's face it.
But that's I know, I saw the piece as well, Rachel. But then EasyJet's entire model, and other carriers like them, is around high load factors, very quick turnarounds. If they've got to deep clean a plane every time you know, they turn around in a destination, if they've got to take one seat out, if they've got to add, I've seen one image of perspex screens to divide people, but that's adding more weight, that requires more fuel. I mean, the whole model would, you know, would not be able to exist if some of these measures were put in, presumably, Paul.
Well, the challenge is huge. I mean, it's interesting, EasyJet's announcement, because it was quite well regarded, actually, that announcement. But when you think about it, that's not a 2-metre social distance between seat 1A and seat 1C, is it? And so I think the airline industry itself is going to have to reset. It's going to have to remodel their business plans. And that's why people like Emirates also came out with the announcement about testing passengers on some flights and trialling that, which was also well received. But let's not underestimate the huge challenge that operators of any kind, cruise, air, etc., are going to be facing. They're all going to have to reset. They're all going to have to change how their business models work. They're going to have to invest huge amounts of money in social distancing measures and health measures over the next 2 years until the scene is firmly mass produced. And yet, they're also going to be battling against the number one issue. That's that consumers will not have as much money. A lot of consumers will be furloughed. A lot will be taking salary cuts. They will want to save their cash over the next 6 months to 12 months if they've got any coming in. And that will mean a smaller industry for the next year and a half. And that's why I'm saying to clients, you've got to plan for that. You've got to rework your business models to cope with an industry that could be 30, 40, even 50% smaller over the next 12 to 18 months. And if you can plan for that, you'll be in a good position to benefit from it as a result.
Yeah. All right, guys, I'm conscious of time, but just one more question for you, Danny. You write a magazine that's obviously for PR professionals. And yeah, certainly from my experience, because we're trying to contact all sorts of people in the travel industry. And one of the job roles that appears to be furloughed quite readily has been PR people. So, you know, we can't get hold of people where you know, in certain places that we want to get hold of in order to try and write stories. So, you know, when we're talking about having this right messaging and, you know, coming back and all the rest of it, you know, how much of a challenge is that going to be when we, you know, I understand why companies have had to do it, but how big a challenge is that when lots of PR people are not working at the moment?
I think it's a huge challenge for companies. I mean, the demand to communicate and to deal with the issues has never been so high on PR departments. So, you know, if companies are making their PR departments redundant or putting them on furlough, they're shooting themselves in the foot. So obviously, as somebody who writes about the PR industry, who likes the PR industry, who supports PR professionals, I'd certainly urge companies to furlough and make redundant their comms staff as the very last resort. I do think this is the time when this sort of crisis is when communications comes into its own. And if you've got experienced communicators, they will help you navigate through the crisis. It may well be actually that marketing people suffer more than communications people at this time, because it's more difficult at the moment to promote, to advertise, but you still need to communicate. So I'd urge companies not to lose good communicators.
Okay, well, obviously the two people below you are nodding furiously because they are two of the best communicators in the industry. And to all of you, I'm really grateful for your thoughts and your insight. I think that will be very useful for people running businesses and hoping to get through the other side. So thank you very much to Danny from PR Week, to Paul from the PC Agency, and to Rachel from Kuoni. Thank you, guys. Thanks very much indeed.
Thank you.